everybody. Welcome to Idio Talk, a Radiohead podcast. I am Walker Glenn.
I'm Zach Glenn.
It's good to see you, Zach.
It's great to be here. I'm excited.
I'm excited too. So just want to let everyone know what the heck they're listening to. Last week was a really exciting episode for us. Mm-hmm. We went through all the tracks of Radiohead's as of now, last studio album.
I said maybe.
Pool. Wait, what's that from?
I don't know. Just I said maybe is like gives you hope, but it's usually not good, you know?
Oh,
If
sure.
maybe.
It's like, right. Can I get a toy? And it's like maybe, but that maybe was actually to shut you up while we get through the Target.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, buddy, I was in a Target at night last night. I don't know if you've done that recently, but that's maybe something to, after I tell people what the heck this podcast is, maybe.
No, I want to hear about it though.
Okay. Yeah. It was pretty exciting. I was in a Target at 9 p.m. last night. It was Target after dark, baby.
Okay.
But, I wanted to tell people what this podcast is because we're welcoming some new listeners this week. Mm-hmm. Last week we had Noel Brown on of Stuff They Don't Want You to Know and Ridiculous History. And I'm not going to say that Stuff They Don't Want You to Know and Ridiculous History has more listeners than Idio Talk, a Radiohead podcast. No, I would never say that. I will say they've been around a little longer.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know has been around since 2008.
Yeah.
Idio Talk, a Radiohead podcast, has been around since early 2022. So we're on your heels, iHeartRadio. Yeah. You know, don't get too, you know, in Jurassic Park, the image of the T-Rex in the side mirror, and it says, "Yes, we gotta go now.
Must go faster.
Now.
Must go faster." God, Laura Dern rocks in that scene. That's what makes that movie so believable. Is that one moment of her screaming shit? Get off the gear shift, Ellie.
Laura Dern rules. She was like kind of an acquired taste for me that I didn't really appreciate until adulthood. But she's such a dynamic and interesting actor.
Yeah. So we are the T-Rex on.
We are the T-Rex. That's right. That's right.
Noel's Laura Dern.
Is Noel Laura Dern? I think Noel might be Ian Malcolm because he came on our podcast. So he's more like life finds a way. Like he kind of knows. like the corporate suits at iHeartRadio are like, we've heard about their Laura Dern. Or no, they're John Hammond. They're like, we've seen that there's this new Radiohead podcast on the block, but don't worry, we sterilized them all so they can't breed. Like, we're in control. And then Noel is just like, we need to learn how to contend with Idio Talk, a Radiohead podcast.
Totally.
Right. But what even Noel doesn't know is that you unleash a T-Rex like Walker and Zach Glenn. There's no telling what's going to happen. Life finds a way. It's a perfect metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the point I'm making here, Zach? I'm saying that we were really, really happy to have Noel on. And with him, we know came some new listeners who might be checking this episode out. This might be your first post-Noel episode if you're a listener to his stuff. And so we just wanted to let all the new folks know Zach and I have been going through Radiohead's whole discography. And you might be saying to yourself, wait, so there's only 9 episodes to this podcast? No, far from it. We have taken deviations all over the place. We have attempted to chronologically cover, if not in its entirety, the majority of the side projects, particularly the Thom-driven ones that exist outside of Radiohead. We've also done episodes where we have guests on just to talk about Radiohead in general, Radiohead music theory, the art of Radiohead, and
Radiohead in film.
Radiohead in film. You might be looking back in our feed and going, what are these Batman episodes? Yes, we have also covered the late 80s to early 90s Batman franchise every once in a while. And today is one of those kind of side episodes where even though we have gone through Radiohead's entire studio catalog, Idio Talk marches on. And fortunately, Thom Yorke marched on as well. And a few years after A Moon-Shaped Pool, he dropped his third solo LP, Anima, on us. And that is what we're here to discuss today. Zach, your thoughts?
Nothing to add. I'm just really excited because, like you said, like we covered a lot of the different side projects, not all of them. And this is a big one, and this is a recent one. So it feels like we're catching up to ourselves, which is sort of interesting.
I had that same thought researching this one and its release and rollout very much coming into kind of, more contemporary historical and world events. It was a strange feeling. It was like
it was.
Did you feel like it's like, oh, this is the first time? Because even when we talked about A Moon-Shaped Pool, that like
it's long enough ago to where I felt like I was grappling with like a recognizable but a different Zach.
Same. Like that for me is like that's the first Radiohead album that we covered where some things in my life look the same. Yeah. Like I'm a father by the time that comes out. I'm doing stand-up comedy by the time it comes out. But it's still, like you said, it's long enough ago that I have great recall about that time. But it's like, oh, wow, another, what has it been? 7 years? Another 7 years has passed. That's a chunk of time. This one, I'm like, oh, yeah, like ain't too much different going on now than when Anima was released.
No, and I mean we'll talk about it I know that this is something that we'll come up to. But yeah, I mean just because of the year of its release and what accompanying tours might not have happened, that is always a trip when you kind of are reconciling that with the release of something. So yeah, not much to add, but I'm really excited. This is a recent one. It's a big one, and like A Moon-Shaped Pool, like King of Limbs, and almost like In Rainbows, the release of this album coincided directly with my listening to it a ton. So yeah, that's all I would say.
And to touch on what you just said about you listening to it a ton, it also reminds me that I should tell any new listeners, and heck, even the old Idio Talkers might just be like, you know what? I like when Walker and Zach reestablish their credibility at the beginning of every episode.
Absolutely.
Why are we doing a Radiohead podcast? Well, we are brothers. That's why we have the same last name. We are the Glenn brothers. We have a fair amount of shared interests and shared obsessions, but Radiohead is kind of at the top of the heap in terms of things that Zach and I just realized at a certain point, whether it was on the phone because we are millennials who still like, yes, we text a lot, but every once in a while an actual phone call will still take place, or in person, we're like, man, we really love to talk about Radiohead. And in this day and age, if you love talking about anything with another person and you don't turn that into a podcast, I don't know what to tell you. You're just leaving money on the table. Any conversation that you're having with a loved one that is not recorded, where anyone is slightly witty or interesting, you're a fool. You got to record that. You got to put that out there for the people. So our credentials are that we are brothers who love Radiohead. And that is, and I think that we came into this project knowing a decent amount about Radiohead, but I'll speak for myself. I have learned more than I ever thought possible about this band, these guys, and what they do.
I would agree. It's really cool. I knew that I loved the band. I knew the band members. I knew all the songs from, I think, every album, but I just feel like I know them even better now, which does make me, it is a mixed bag of feelings, because I'm like, do I wish that I knew as much before we began? Maybe. But would the podcast be any better? Probably not. So I think it's cool that our listeners have gotten to learn some new nuggets with us, even if they already knew them. Watch us learn them, or listen to us learn them.
I think so. We're not here to lecture, you know. Should we talk about Anima?
Please, I would love to.
So Anima is the third solo album of Thom Yorke. Came out in 2019, June 27th of 2019. And I'm going to throw to you. I'd love to hear kind of what was going on with the background for the writing, recording, and kind of rollout of this album.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you stated, it's the third solo album of Thom Yorke, lead singer, frontman, multi-instrumentalist of the band Radiohead. It came out on June 27th, 2019, so we're talking just under 4 years ago. And it was accompanied by a short film that was released the same day, directed by Paul Thomas Anderson. We're not going to get into that right now. Its length, it's a little bit longer than some of Tom's other solo works. It's 47 minutes, 44 seconds.
Still 9 tracks, I think worth noting. Another under 10 track project that's pretty lengthy. So
I really like that.
Me too, but it means we got some long songs on this one.
Yeah. I was thinking about that last night, though, just when I was writing out the tracks. I was like, this is like a cool artist statement that I don't know what it means, but I like that the solo works are 8 to 9 tracks.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Huh? None of them, because
the Eraser's 9. Yeah, and then
Modern Boxes is 8. Okay.
Yeah, it's cool. I think it's just like an understated statement, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brings me to my next point. It's 9 tracks long.
Which brings me to my next point. Security. Gonna need a man with a rifle here, man with a rifle here.
Is that really necessary? And then, so I mean, obviously a little bit short on just the data pertaining to the album, pertaining to the background and recording. This is not so different, and I would love you to jump in here before or after, as I go through this. But to me, it seems like when people write about it or when they report on it or when Thom and Nigel talk about it, there's this consistent through line, which is that Thom wrote Anima following a period of depression, anxiety, and sadness, and that accompanied or was in tandem with writer's block. We can talk about kind of what we think he means by writer's block if we want later, but it's really difficult to get a firm understanding of the writing and recording dates from any reliable source. If you have those, please jump in. But this is, I think, largely attributable to the manner in which the album was recorded, right? Kind of similar to the Eraser, in that the album is constructed by Thom sending these long, unfinished sort of tracks to Nigel, lots and lots of music for him to sort through that he will then kind of slice and edit and then give back to Thom to put melody and words over.
Yep.
And that really reminded me more of the Eraser than I did of Tomorrow's Modern Boxes. And I think that what's interesting for me...
And Amok.
Oh yeah, for sure. But I think Amok, though, maybe would differ slightly because it was like a jam session between him and musicians. Whereas when it talks about what Thom would give to, whatever you want to say, give to Nigel to sort of sort through and turn into a sample to then turn into a song, I was a little bit unclear as to what it was he was providing him. Is it just, long ambient noise, whatever? But I think that what I mean to say is that, when we talk about A Moon-Shaped Pool, when we talk about Hail the Thief, when we talk about King of Limbs, whatever, the recorded dates within the band, even Amok, are a little bit more clear because you have musicians in the studio trying to work stuff out. Whereas to me, this seems like it would be a multi-year long process that while he's touring, I don't know, A Moon-Shaped Pool, maybe he's working on. It wasn't clear to me, but that's sort of what I have pertaining to the background. A little bit thinner than usual. Again, this album is so recent, so finding a lot of rich information about its recording, I think, might just take a little bit of time if we ever get that. But that was kind of the majority of what I had.
That I think that's true. Like if there's a really tumultuous or sexy story here, maybe we'll come back and do it when they release the 10-year anniversary edition of Anima. But I think that is more to chew on than maybe you're giving it credit for. I mean, I think that this is just the reason we're being less extensive in the background is because this is kind of established as Thom and Nigel's process at this point. I do agree with you. Yes. I think that I didn't get the impression that Tomorrow's Modern Boxes was combing through years of material the way this and the Eraser were, but that was the process with Eraser. That was the process with this. A variation on that process is how they made the Atoms for Peace album, Amok. Mm-hmm. And the thing that all these Thom solo projects have in common is, even though it says Thom Yorke on the jacket, the music, the songs are all credited to Thom Yorke and Nigel Godrich. So when they say that Thom is sending scraps, I don't have specific insight into what those scraps are. I would guess that they are, scraps of like chords on the synth, guitar lines, bass lines, little grooves, probably vocal melodies, and then they build out the songs that way. And I will say right now that, like on the Eraser, for me, the results on this album are really, really stellar and sound really, really labored over in the best way possible. I think this is a extremely confident album from Thom, and maybe the most, I'm not saying that it's my favorite, but it is maybe the most cohesive and kind of tightly packaged in its statement out of all the Thom solo stuff we've heard. And I'm kind of including Amok in that, even though that's not a Thom solo album. I do feel that it's like, yeah, these four kind of exist in their own category for me of like Thom Nigel, a Thom Nigel duo collaboration, is where we get these records. Yeah. But I want to kind of ask you what's your general feeling about this album, and do you remember how you felt about it at the time that it came out, if at all?
Yeah, June 27th, 2019 was a good summer. I remember I had heard about this, I think maybe a week or so before it came out. I know that like Thom's other solo work, there wasn't a ton of press and so forth prior to its release. But I know that I heard about it a day or so before, or a couple days before it was released. And I remember listening to it at work upon its release. I would go on a walk on my lunch break every day, and I remember listening to it that summer quite a bit, and I remember really liking it. And then it kind of slipped away. And when the pandemic happened, and I was very fortunate to keep my job, but start work from home. And I was already working from home part-time too, but prior to this. But to me, in my mind, Walker, this music is prime pandemic listening. And I can't really explain why. It is sort of interesting to like think back to those early months when there was a lot of uncertainty, and I know there still is, listeners. I'm not trying to talk about things as if they've all been solved, but I do feel that from a state of mind perspective and all of that I am in a different place, as I think a lot of us are, whether that's better or worse. But yeah, I just remember listening to this album in the months of March, April, and May. I want to say nonstop. Maybe I'll say just short of that. But just this is the Thom solo work I've listened to the most. And I would now put the Eraser in front of that, because I think my order, my favor of Thom solo work is more ensconced and decided at this point. And I'll just say, I don't mind saying, if it's okay, that I put the Eraser above this, but not by a huge margin. But man, dude, I listen to this so much, and it is interesting to me because some of the melodies and some of the word patterns that he uses were really ingrained in my mind. And going back to it had been some time since I'd listened to it, maybe, I don't want to say a year, but quite a few months. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's what's really interesting is I don't know that I've had a ton of musical growth, but I do know that there has been some over the last 3 years. The first 2020 to 2021, I really felt like my guitar playing grew quite a bit, and the way, anytime that happens, the way you hear music is going to open up a little bit. And so I just remembered a little bit more chaos kind of in the melodies than when I went back to it this time. So when I think back to Anima prior to, and I just want to say too, I've even listened to it over the last year that we've been recording, so it's not that far away. But when I think back to my state of mind of first hearing this, I remember being a little bit more like, this is so cool, but I can't keep up with it. Whereas when I listen to it now, I can track with it a lot more. And I'm not trying to say like this is something that that I could ever make, or that's not where I'm coming at it.
No, but you You speak Tom's language more than ever right now, though, dude, because you've been living and breathing his music for the last year.
Dude, that's what it is. You pulled it right out. Yeah, I think that I speak Tom a little bit more. Some of the noises, like like I said, I listened to it a lot and more than I had listened to The Eraser when it first came out. I couldn't have put it any better. Yeah, I feel like I speak Tom's language a little bit better, and it just makes more sense to me this time. And so that's kind of where I would put a pin in it now. Do you have anything you want to add on, or I don't know?
Yeah, I will. I mean, I this album is one that has kind of backgrounded for me. It's not one like Tomorrow's Modern Boxes where I was coming to it clean. I listened to this album when it came out, and not only that, I quite liked it. But in the intervening years, which have not been many, but had been enough that I really had not thought about this album for a while, and it was really, really fun to rediscover it. I don't know if it is a reflection of kind of the time we're living in, or stuff that's going on in my personal life, or this podcast, or all of the above, but this album resonates with me in a very deep way now. And
man, that's awesome.
This one is the definition of a grower in that I dug it when it came out. I dug it when I started listening to it a lot over the last month or so, getting ready to talk about it. But it has really rewarded patient and repeated listens to the point that I am kind of convinced this album is maybe intentionally backloaded. I think it's kind of structured in a way where it's taking you on a very slow burn. And not only do I find that the album kind of really kicks into gear of what it's doing in the middle and then rides a high that it had not quite reached for its first few tracks, which is not to say I don't love the first few tracks, because I actually do a lot, but it just takes you to a new level at this midpoint and stays up there. Yeah. I think even the songs themselves are backloaded. A lot of these songs don't really hit their stride till they're like 2/3 of the way through. Like, he'll have a 6-minute song that I'm kind of bobbing my head along going like, this is cool, but it's kind of starting to fade into the background. And just as it's starting to fade into the background, it'll move into some new part or vocal rhythm or sound that, like, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I was asleep at the wheel here. I'm so in. But everything
Tom, take the wheel.
Tommy, take the wheel, right? And not only...
Sorry, Walker, I'm a very rude person. That's why I interrupted
you. All right. Well, last I heard, you were circling the drain. So let me just try to twist my way back in here. Listeners, these jokes are all going to make sense soon. But yeah, like, so when these songs, these kind of backloaded songs kick in, it's not even a thing of, oh, now I like it. It's like, oh, I didn't know how, it's like a movie that Kubrick, he's got to get mentioned at least once an episode. Some of his best movies, I'm never bored, but the big thing happens right at the last moment it could before I get bored. Like, just as I'm getting kind of lulled into like a,
you get taken to that red bathroom.
Yes, exactly. And then it's like, oh, this has so much more impact because of everything that happened now that felt like it was maybe just kind of humming along. And I feel that on this album and then on the individual songs, and I don't know. It's a real achievement in kind of patient songwriting for me.
Man, I just don't have anything to add. I think that's just so well said, and I'm really excited to hear kind of, I don't know if it'll be in this episode, but maybe when we do our ranking of the Radiohead individual albums, we could kind of put Tom in there as well, or we could talk about, since this is at this time, the last Thom Yorke solo album, we could maybe talk about at the end, but I don't know if there's a better way to lead into the album. I don't have anything to add, but I really would agree with that.
I think that would be great. I've actually already thought, in addition to ranking the Radiohead studio albums and picking our top 10 Radiohead tracks, I think we should then do a separate top 10 that is everything else we've anything that is not on a Radiohead studio album that we've covered.
Yeah.
So
Great.
then another big list that it's like you can put, a song from Phantom Thread or a Tom solo song or Shangri-La by EOB or whatever that fucking shit Phil was doing is, it's all. Now, Zach, you talked about listening to this a lot during the pandemic. We also talked about how this is the first album we're covering where, as we're kind of reading about the background, we're like, oh yeah, okay, this is a couple years ago, right? And the pandemic really factors into that. This album never got its own tour because it was planned for 2020, and then we all know what happened. Kind of like a lot of other Radiohead and Thom Yorke material, I think you could apply a revisionist perspective to this, because this album to me is kind of about having to continue to function in society even while society is in collapse around you. And I do not think that Tom knew there was going to be a global pandemic, but I do think it very much mirrors a lot of what is being explored on this album. They marketed this album in kind of, a modern viral marketing style where there were all these fake advertisements or advertisements, as they would say across the pond.
On the telly. No, not on the telly.
In the tube for Anima Technologies. And these ads were for a camera that can record your dreams. Now, let's talk about this concept of Anima. It was new to me in learning about this album, but it's a Jungian concept about the female part that exists in the male unconsciousness. And that's pretty specific, but when I read an interview with Tom about kind of how that relates to what the album is about for him, he seemed to kind of key in more on this idea of dreaming and unconsciousness than necessarily it being about the dichotomy between kind of male and female consciousness in the human brain. So this quote from Tom about why he ended up calling the album Anima goes something like this. So Tom says, I think the reason it ended up being called Anima was partly because I'm obsessed with this whole dream thing. And it comes from this concept that Carl Jung had. But also, we have started to emulate what our devices say about us and emulate the way we behave from that. So I had this whole thing where, like, the reason we can watch Boris Johnson lie through his teeth, promise something that we know will never happen, is we don't have to connect with it directly because it's a little avatar. It's this little guy with a stupid haircut waving a flag. Okay, that's all right. That's funny. And the consequences are not real. The consequences of everything we do are not real. We can remain anonymous. We can send our avatar out to hurl abuse and poison, then trot back anonymous.
I loved that. I saw that quote too. It reminded me so much of the way we behave on the internet. And I mean, this may be exactly what he's speaking to, but that's just what it made me think of, I think, the most. And I think too, just to go back a couple steps, I mentioned when I was just doing the light background, release date, recorded, and so forth, that there was an accompanying short film directed by Paul Thomas Anderson. It is like a music video, but it's so much more than that, because I do believe it covers at least 2 songs, right, Walker?
3
songs, yeah. So it's a short film accompanying a portion of the album. But talking about the dream section pertaining to the meaning of the album, there are moments in this short film that depict sometimes the repetitive, frustrating nature of what can occur in a dream like nothing I've ever seen. And it is difficult to depict dreams, I think, in TV and film. Obviously, there are just challenges because we all dream differently, but we all dream the same too. So you don't want to go too. But I don't know when we'll want to, we don't necessarily have to pull it up, but I think maybe when the music's playing, I might dive into that a bit more. But just because you were speaking to it in terms of the album title, I just wanted to call attention to the fact that, you know, some of the parts I love more than others. It's all shot incredibly well, but in a short film that I've watched probably 4 times now, it's so interesting what things stand out to me each time. And I think that's kind of like listening to or watching any great work. You know, I'm not going to say this is P.T. Anderson's greatest work or even his greatest work in collaborating with Radiohead or one of the members of, but I found it to be so interesting from that dream angle over the last, I guess it was 2 nights ago that I watched it. But
I think the short film is really, really a perfect part of the package of this album and its themes. And I really think that listeners, if you haven't, you should go watch it. It's on Netflix. It's 15 minutes long. It's a extended music video that takes the songs from the album, Not the News, Traffic, and then ends with Dawn Chorus, my favorite song on the album. And
I knew it.
And the short film to me really drives home the idea that I think Thom is getting at in that quote, and that I hear throughout the lyrics, of this idea of society itself as the dream, this modern kind of technological hellscape and the performance of these things that we have to do to function in it. That's the dream. I think this is honestly the closest thing to a concept album that Thom Yorke has ever made. Like in sound and theme, it's basically all one piece, kind of one story. I was doing a little experiment earlier today where I was listening to the album and imagining each song is all from the perspective of one narrator. And I don't think it's like replete with like characters or things like that, you know. I'm not talking about Tommy or the Black Parade here or anything like that, but it really is a conceptual piece in my mind. I think that this album is talking about the fear of trying to survive in this kind of tech world, right? And this kind of late stage capitalism world. And then it does that by having an album that sounds like a cold tech hell.
Right.
And throughout that sound, you have Thom's voice kind of fighting its way through. I really think this album is about humanity trying to fight its way out of all this artifice. It's about trying to remain human in a world that's trying to make robots out of us all. And I think that's a lot of what the short film is showing, is kind of like, it's kind of this dystopian love story where you're trying to find your way to another person while basically having to go to work and take the bus and report for duty and, you know, and show
do the dance of life.
Do the dance of life. Show up for all this shit that you didn't sign up for, but you have no choice but to participate in. And all of it isolates you from other people. Yeah. Like, I don't know how you felt about this, but we should say also the short film basically stars Thom and his now wife, girlfriend at the time. I'm going to do my best here. It's an Italian name, but Dojana Roncioni, I would say.
Yeah.
Roncioni. And in the
I was unclear on her last name pronunciation, so either way.
I'm going to say Dojana Roncioni. And if I got that wrong, I apologize. But in the beginning, you see her and Thom kind of exchange this flirty glance on a subway where everybody, including them, is all wearing this kind of like nondescript worker uniform. And the way they looked at each other, I almost felt like there's a story here where it's like they're not allowed to be doing that.
Me too. I got very 1984 vibes.
Very much so.
Winston, and I forget the woman's name, but that was sort of where I said it in my mind. Not totalitarian Nazi Germany, but more the way Orwell depicts 1984 in this sort of like, there's a homogeny in fashion that is sort of just like bland but bright. Anyways,
absolutely.
That was sort of, yeah.
I mean, it's that's what it was to me. It's these two songs that are about kind of like the rat race of life.
Mm-hmm.
And then this third song that is about finding some sort of love and connection while still being kind of suffocated and choked by that. And it really, really, I'm not going to lie, it touched me. It really, really hit me. And I found myself crying by the end of it. Did you have any thoughts about, how the short film kind of ties into the album?
Oh my gosh. Yes. I mean, I love so many of the things you touched on. Just, I thought were just, you just summarized really, really, really well and just sparked some of what I had kind of picked up on along the way. I mean, the first thing that you talked about was that this might be the closest that Thom has ever come to writing a concept album intentionally. And I agree. And the only other time that is really, that I've heard, other folks certainly observe, and I would agree with a little bit, is OK Computer, and OK Computer is not, according to the band, it's not a concept album per se, but it's not that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and I think OK Computer is 1997, so it obviously predates a film such as The Matrix, and then this obviously comes afterwards. And The Matrix, I think, is something that is so easy to kind of not roll your eyes at, but just sort of think of as like, well, yeah, duh, at this point, cut out some of the elements like the fighting, which make it fun to watch. But like, you touched on it in our episode with Casey, like what was it societally that was driving, I think, creators like the Wachowski siblings, to frame things in that context of there's got to be more than this. And I think when you think about it in that way, it does have a lot of profound meaning, and it's not necessarily new or that they were the only people to think about it, but clearly a lot of people were, and they were able to sort of distill it into this package. And I think that OK Computer does that, and like I said, it predates The Matrix, so it's pretty cool. Not exactly, and the messaging isn't the same. And I feel like this sort of does the same thing too. Like you were talking about, like existing in society and having to, whether you can wake up or not, whether it's like a dream that's implanted or not, it's speaking to that. And then like to the dream part that I was trying to speak to earlier, when he's trying to go through the subway, I forget what those bars are called, but that you have to go through in any subway system, and he keeps turnstile, and he keeps getting stuck on it. To me, I'm like, this is like a dream that I've either had or would have. But what's so cool about it is that it's just a relatable, repetitive, frustrating dream. But it also really speaks to the messaging, whatever the messaging may be, whether it's something I'm creating or is there or not, so it's like really cleverly laid out. And the other thing that I thought about when I was watching it, and this was a new context I was able to apply because I had not seen Suspiria the last 3 times or so that I had watched it, was it really was interesting to me watching it and how intentional the choreo. I mean, obviously the camera operation and all of that is incredible, but like the focus on choreographed dance was very, very similar to what is happening in Suspiria a lot, which is not a P.T. Anderson directed film, but Thom Yorke did the soundtrack work for. And I don't have anything else to elaborate on that. It not in a way that it feels derivative or lifted, but I thought it is interesting that in the period of 2018 to 2019, Thom was really focused on either providing music for or participating in himself a little bit more of an organized choreographed dance. Do you kind of get what I'm driving at? Like how that's a big theme of Suspiria? And I don't know. I mean, I don't really have a lot to elaborate on there because I don't have a point. I mean, you kind of already fleshed that out with like the dance that we do in life or society or whatever. It was fun though for me this time to watch that. Maybe Thom, in watching Suspiria, was like, hey, I fucking really like this and I like to dance, and it's always been a little bit sort of chaotic, but I would like to do something where I depict that in a little bit more of an organized fashion, or I do my usual unorganized dancing against these very performative and synchronized dancers. I don't know. But those are just some of the things that you touched on that really stood out to me as well. Like the idea of a concept album and sort of juxtaposed to where The Matrix or stuff like that, Vanilla Sky has sort of sandwiched in between it. Again, I don't have a big point there, but like it's just interesting to sort of think about. And I wanted to talk about the dancing elements. So I don't know. I think I generally kind of touched on some of the stuff that spoke to me, but I don't know.
Well, I love what you said about trying to get through the turnstile and it being this like repetitive motion that you would have in a dream, and this like simple task that you can't accomplish in a dream. And to me, it's like the dystopia that is depicted in this album and then visually depicted in the short film accompanying the album. What I love about it is that there's these little differences or these little escalations that make it slightly sci-fi, but really it's like the dystopia is now. The dystopia is us. And I think this album hit me so hard because it like really perfectly tied into some things that I just read and watched. So I just read the book Capitalist Realism by Mark Fisher, and it explores the idea that it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism, and then kind of pontificates and paints a picture of, well, what does living under that assumption do to humanity? And then I watched the movie Children of Men, and I'd seen it before, but it just really, really emotionally hit me for the same reason this album does, is it's positing the same type of environment where it's like degradation is so normalized, but people still have to carry on with what they are supposed to be doing, right? Doing the dance, doing the performance, even though everything around you has collapsed or fallen into disrepair. But it's like the feeling of love and human connection being the thing that you can't drive out of people, even with all that happening, is what's present on this album for me. And I loved that in the short film that he and this woman see each other on a train going through a tunnel, going to do this weird kind of like interpretive dance depiction of like work on the factory floor is kind of how I saw it. Like this like dance of the proletariat, basically. They see each other. There's like acknowledgement, but they're not able or allowed to do anything about it. But then when you see them in the end and they're expressing love through the dance that they're doing with each other, they're on a different form of public transit. They're on a city bus. And I just
and it looks very similar, but it's distinctly different.
Yes, and it's like they meet again and they fall in love, but the machine grinds on. It's like love can't be stopped. And not to be too fucking corny about it, but it's like no matter what happens in this world, to kind of continue to make this just like kind of a neo-capitalist like tech nightmare, you can't stop that. Like that part, no matter how isolated we become and like live in our own little bubbles, like when we do bump back into each other, there still is going to be this like desire to connect. And I don't know, I pulled something up from the book Capitalist Realism that kind of makes if I can read this. So I'm paraphrasing a couple things, but he talks about Children of Men here. And so the author, Mark Fisher, he says, watching Children of Men, we are inevitably reminded of the phrase that it is easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism. That slogan captures capitalist realism, the widespread sense that not only is capitalism the only viable political and economic system, but also that it is now impossible to even imagine a coherent alternative to it. Once, dystopian films and novels were exercises in such acts of imagination, the disasters they depicted acting as a narrative pretext for the emergence of different ways of living. Not so in Children of Men. The world that it projects seems more like an extrapolation or exacerbation of ours than an alternative to it. In its world, as in ours, ultra-authoritarianism and capital are by no means incompatible. Internment camps and franchise coffee bars coexist. In Children of Men, public space is abandoned, given over to uncollected garbage and stalking animals. There is no withering away of the state, only a stripping back of the state to its core military and police functions. The catastrophe in Children of Men is neither waiting down the road, nor has it already happened. Rather, it is being lived through. There is no punctual moment of disaster. The world doesn't end with a bang. It winks out, unravels, gradually falls apart. That to me is the world of Anima. And that's the dream that he's talking about living in.
Man, I really want to read that book, for one thing. I love that it incorporates these ideas that you're talking about while also citing like contemporary, because Children of Men was what, 2006, I want to say?
Yes.
Yeah, so, contemporary film, and I just wanted to point that out, because if I was it wasn't meant to imply that I have read that book, but man, I would just love to, and I love so much on what you're hitting on, and I don't mean to just tack on pointless additions, but it does make me think of, and please don't apologize for being cheesy or whatever it was you said, because I just love these ideas so much, and I love them now, in a time when we say, or I shouldn't say we, when I say I follow that conventional narrative. I really try not to be critical of my own generation or of the, is it Gen X before us? I just dislike that kind of talk so much, because to me it just perpetuates what we've always done since we've had generations that we could cite.
Sure.
I certainly will acknowledge that the boomer generation created some issues or whatever, but people are always creating issues is sort of my contention.
Sure.
And I don't know where I got that from, but I love these. In that I will be critical and be like, we are all addicted to our phones. Instead of using I language, I am addicted to my phone, and I struggle to, and I think that can really like sort of reset your mind. And I'm not saying that this has cured me or that I am able to do this all the time, but I just love that idea so much of art kind of reminding us through whatever avenue it can that, despite all the shit that is just there, that is purposeful or whatever, whether it's smartphones, whether it's work, whether it's electronic inputs, whatever, that at our core humanity, sort of the same ideas persist. And I like Children of Men. I have not watched it in many years. I definitely need to rewatch it. But the movie that I know has been brought up on this podcast quite a few times that I think really speaks to that idea really, really well for me, and also this capitalist idea, is Blade Runner 2049. And I think, say what you will about that movie, but what's so interesting about it, and a criticism that's been lobbed at it, is that it depicts this dystopian future so well, where our idea of what capitalism has so single-handedly dominated society, and is therefore a very anti-capitalistic film, which I do think is a theme that's present, and I think is really cool that a major studio made a movie with those themes buried in it. And capitalism dominance is comorbid with just exactly what you were just talking about that's present in Children of Men, just like this utter and complete, not chaos, but just like the planet is ruined, right? Like we have toxic, the equivalent of like acid rain falling or snow all the time, and people just exist, but and at the core of that film is not necessarily a love story. It is one of the cores between Rick Deckard and Sean Young's character Rachel, but also in the core of the sequel, what is really like driving it is like the idea of a baby, a child, right? So it is like, it's not like a love story necessarily, that is one of them, but it's just these other like this primal thing, which is like, procreation, that is driving. And people have sussed out narratives that I do not think are intentional in the Blade Runner sequel, that it's a film that is intentionally pro-life and anti-abortion. And I think that you can get that meaning if you want out of it, but I think at a deeper level, what it's driving at is something much, much greater, which is like actually women having autonomy over their bodies, whether they do or do not want to keep a child, which I think is so cool. All that, I mean, I want to refocus here because this isn't a sales pitch for that movie necessarily, but I think that like that is what a lot of art is trying to drive at, is like, how do we refocus our humanity despite where the world is either going or going to go, whether it's an economic system that's making this chaos, but at our core. And I think that's why those stories resonate so much, you know, whether it's in film or music or whatever. And we could cut that because I was sort of just like a tack on exactly what you just said.
No, I love it.
But yeah,
this is why I loved this album, because it's really made me like live in kind of these ideas.
Well, and I brought up Blade Runner.
It just coincided so well with, like I said, just stuff that I already just happened to be reading and watching. So it just fit perfectly.
Well, yeah, and I brought up that too because Blade Runner, you know, the coloration in the short film of this, and I mean, you know, Denis Villeneuve, the director of the sequel, is one of the most, I would say, lauded and sort of celebrated directors in our current era. Not the most, and he might not be at the P.T. Anderson level, but like in my mind, he is. And there's something about the coloration of this short film and a lot of the dress that really reminded me of both Blade Runner and its sequel, and then a lot of the ideas that it's driving at, you know, whether intentional or not, and the ambience of the music and the Blade Runner score is, and its sequel, Hans Zimmer, who is kind of up and down for me, you know. Hans Zimmer did the score, and it's one of my favorite scores ever. And Johnny Greenwood has cited this score and Hans Zimmer's work as they are each other's favorite film composers, which I think is really cool. And Johnny Greenwood has talked extensively about the Blade Runner 2049 score and what it does in terms of its atmosphere and how much he loves it. And then you have Johnny Greenwood working with P.T. Anderson in a collaborative sense, not necessarily on this project. So, you know, I don't mean to fall into everything is connected, all this is this, that is that. That's not what I'm trying to do. It is just really fun, though, like when I think you have these deep thinking people and the ideas that they're driving at, and you could sort of just feel the same thing, whether it exists in you or it's intentional from the creator or not. It's really, really cool.
I agree, man. And like, I think that I wonder why these themes on this album that are not new to this album, right? Like Thom Yorke has been concerned with kind of the suffocating nature of modern Western life since the Bends, you know, like, and then incredibly that comes into like much greater fruition in OK Computer. And then it's been present in his work, I would say, consistently in some shape or form on everything that we've covered. But I think there's something that really, really touches me about how personal it feels on this album. And I think that has something to do with the fact that his partner is the person that he's kind of having this like silent love story with in the short film. There's just something, again, it's that kind of like, it's that softening of old age that we've kind of talked about that comes up,
but very brittle still, though.
Yes, it's
really brittle in this album.
Yes, this album is cold and anxious sounding, but there is, I really do think that it's about humanity kind of fighting to get out through that. Like you said, having a child, falling in love, making a friend, kissing your kids goodnight, like whatever it is, like in this kind of like dystopian world that Anima puts us in, it's the rose growing out of concrete, or to use the In Rainbows metaphor, it's the rainbow in the oil slick, you know, and
big time.
It just really, really, this idea that, again, like I just really, really hit me emotionally in Children of Men, you know, spoilers for the movie, but it's a world where everyone has been infertile. There have been new children born in 18 years. And towards the end of the movie, when the first baby has been born, and that
scene is so intense because it just fucking happens.
Yes, the baby is born, and the protagonist is helping the mother and child flee this active war zone. And there's a scene where people who are shooting rockets at each other start seeing the baby, and everything stops. Everything goes silent. Everybody's just staring. And it's this long tracking shot that goes on for maybe a minute of everybody putting down their weapons and stopping. And then all of a sudden, one shot from somewhere goes off and everybody immediately starts shooting again, and it erupts back into chaos. And that idea of there being these parts of our humanity that like no amount of work and know that the machine cannot grind out of us. Like no matter how bad things get, that there's still going to be this part of us that will stop and seek that human connection is just really, really powerful to me. And if I haven't droned on too much, before we get into the tracks, I wanted to read one other thing that this really reminded me of.
Please.
We talked about Orwell, you know, being kind of like something that you get a sense is informing the aesthetic in this short film. Have you ever read the Orwell essay, Some Thoughts on the Common Toad?
No, I have not.
It's really
I've only read one of his essays. Which
one?
It was his review of Mein Kampf, which was deeply interesting.
His essays are great. This one, I won't read the whole thing or even most of it. It's actually pretty short, but it basically starts off with him watching the garden toads emerge in the spring of England. And it's just kind of him pontificating about their life cycle and how they breed and what they eat and everything like that. And then it kind of slowly turns into this rumination on how artificial everything in modern life is, and how there's not a lot about our existence that encourages us to stop and experience nature. And so after a page, 2 pages of him just kind of musing on the common toad, Orwell says, I think that by retaining one's childhood love of such things as trees, fishes, butterflies, and to return to my first instance, toads, one makes a peaceful and decent future a little more probable, and that by preaching the doctrine that nothing is to be admired except steel and concrete, one merely makes it a little surer that human beings will have no outlet for their surplus energy except in hatred and leader worship. At any rate, spring is here, even in London, and they can't stop you enjoying it. This is a satisfying reflection. How many a time have I stood watching the toads mating, or a pair of hares having a boxing match in the young corn, and thought of all the important persons who would stop me enjoying this if they could. But luckily they can't. So long as you are not actually ill, hungry, frightened, or immured in a prison or a holiday camp, spring is still spring. The atom bombs are piling up in the factories. The police are prowling through the cities. The lies are streaming from the loudspeakers. But the earth is still going round the sun, and neither the dictators nor the bureaucrats, deeply as they disapprove of the process, are able to prevent it.
Mm-hmm. Man, wow.
And now you need to talk because I am crying.
I just love it. I mean, I think what that passage does so well is it makes me feel the same way like great Radiohead, and I am just going to say Radiohead, but Thom Yorke, Radiohead, or Elliott Smith music kind of makes me feel, in that they are, you know, I think we all, maybe not, I can only speak for myself. I think at times, you know, I've thought of, what music would I want played at like my funeral, you know, or something like that. And not in a way where I'm like, oh, so everybody's crying and I fantasize about, I'm not talking about in that way, but I like will often think like, well, you know, I'd want this Radiohead song or this Elliott Smith song or whatever to celebrate my life, I guess. And I'm like, but none of that would come across the way that it makes me feel, which is like putting the reality of what we deem to be of like, you know, I love the part where he said like important people would interrupt this observation, you know, but he's saying no, but I'm looking at like the beauty in this, you know, this system and the beauty in this beautiful thing right here. And I'm putting aside kind of what is distracting and people deem to be more important, even though it might be ugly. And I just feel like that encapsulates whether Radiohead or Elliott Smith or whatever are trying to evoke an Orwellian feeling or not, that's sort of what I think that all has in common. Is it's not denying the distractions of ugliness in the world. It's actually addressing them directly, but it's sort of like finding beauty in that madness. And I just love stuff that is able to do that so well. And that's not to say too that like, a rom-com, a really good rom-com or whatever is devoid of any depth. We were talking about the Beatles earlier. I don't know how much of that we'll keep, but we were talking about the Beatles earlier. There's a lot of sadness in some Beatles songs, but more than that, I would say there's mostly happiness in them. But that doesn't mean that they're devoid of depth. So it's just different ways of approaching sort of the same overall thing, which is like, life, being a person, et cetera. And you could do that through many different avenues. But I think to just take away depression from something like that Orwell quote, or depression from the Radiohead catalog or Thom Yorke's catalog or Elliott Smith is sort of a one-dimensional way of looking at it. I don't know. When it should really be looked at in multiple dimensions or layers is what I meant to say.
Yeah, no, I agree with that so completely. And it just, for me, like drives home that as a listener, something about Thom making this very antiseptic, dystopic album, something comes through it that is some of his most personal music for me.
We'll talk about it as we listen to the music, because I really do want to save this commentary. But there is a layer of anger that I heard that I do want to wait to commentate on until the music's playing, but that I don't know that I would have heard had we not talked to former guest Noel Brown, because of where he pointed out he heard some anger, whether it's there or not, where he heard it in some of the songs off of Moonshaped Pool. And I will say that jumped out to me as a new reading on it this time, which is interesting.
I agree about the anger on this album. There are points where I was like, oh, this is the most pissed off I've heard Thom since Hail to the Thief.
Yeah.
But again, that's all under that banner for me of human spirit fighting through all this bullshit that is layered on top of it. I really loved that we both got enough out of this album to talk about it for that long. And I'm going to see in the edit, maybe a fun challenge will be to see if I can edit our preamble about the album to 47 minutes, 44 seconds and have it match perfectly the runtime of Anima.
I think you can, because I intentionally did what we talked for a little over 90 minutes. So I intentionally did 23 minutes of shit. And then I think you did too, combined for 46 minutes.
Absolutely. Once again, this podcast mirrors the arc of the band's career.
Yes.
That's why our conversation, as far as the listeners will hear, was one of our most cohesive yet. But what do you say? Should we get into the actual album?
Yeah, absolutely.
So for an album concerned with the repetitive nature and drudgery of modern life, kind of the dreamlike state of doing these same meaningless activities over and over, it starts with a very apt opening track titled Traffic.
Oh, yeah.
I love that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's like a...
Me too.
That doesn't feel... Yeah, it feels kind of like Thom's feeling himself a little bit.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to let this play in the background. I'll just start off by saying, like, in a very general sense, I like this song. This is one of the ones that was, like, a grower for me, where I've liked it a lot more as I've continued to listen to the album and how it kind of fits in overall with the statement of this record. This is one of the songs that is featured in the short film. Yeah. And I do think that it was interesting getting to see Thom's partner in this video.
Oh,
just because
fucking rules. I'm sorry.
No, not at all. Not at all. But Zach,
that's
did you
my precise and awesome commentary. I interrupt you with this song fucking rules.
No, not at all. Not at all. I just was curious though how you reacted to seeing her in the video, because I didn't know that she was in this when I sat down to watch it. I had never watched the short film before, but as soon as it showed her, I was like, oh, I think that's the now Mrs. Thom Yorke. I kind of felt like him putting her in this. I loved it. It totally worked. But I also was like, this is kind of like when you like roll out a new romantic partner on your Instagram.
Yeah,
when you
I thought so
too. When like a woman you follow is like, you know, like lunch with this dummy or whatever, and it's like some guy, and you're like, oh, okay, I didn't know Ashley was was partnered up. This was Tom's like kind of like casually letting us know.
Not so casually though.
I guess not. I mean, it's a pretty big statement.
I don't know. I mean, you know, that was one of the I don't know, because I listened to the album. I did not watch the short film in June of 2019 or July or the following months. I didn't watch it until
you really green
April.
eggs and hammed it. You did not watch it on a train. You did not watch it on a plane.
I watched it in my house with a mouse.
With a mouse.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think I watched it in March or April of 2020. So I kind of had time to let the album breathe in my consciousness as just music, and then watch it. And actually, I don't know if this person is a listener to our show, but a coworker of mine and a good friend, Danielle Gibson, kind of before we all adjourned to work from home, was like, dude, have you watched the Anima short film on Netflix? And I was like, no, I've listened to the album though. Like, how dare you? But no.
Don't tell me my business about Anima.
Well, it's just kind of cute because, you know, Danielle and I have always gotten along over like little pop culture stuff and just gotten along as coworkers, but she just knew what a big Radiohead head I am. And so she was like, oh, you haven't watched it? Oh, I loved it. You got to watch it. And so then, you know, less than a month or so later, I was watching it. And I think I did know at the time that was his new Partner at the time. They have since tied the knot, so no longer living in sin. But yeah, they got married, and I want to say it was the fall of 2020. But at the time of this release and of the filming of this, they were, you know, a freshly minted couple, so to speak. I think they went public with their relationship, so to speak, in the fall of 2017.
Yeah, I mean, and also, you know, I gotta say, way to go, Tom. She's incredibly
beautiful woman.
And, you know, he's looking at her very sexily in the
this
opening.
music is a little bit sexy time, Tom. Like you were saying, the Eraser might be a little bit sexy time. I think this, while being a little bit aggressive and angular and harsh, I do think that whether it's the short film accompaniment, whether it's the fact that we know that they are in fact a couple in real life, what she, you know, and this is another thing too. People don't have to fit into some standard of beauty. Obviously, I think we all know that. But I do really appreciate that this is that she's a beautiful woman, but her beauty is somewhat understated, I would say, in the film itself, which I just really appreciate from a style perspective. I don't know.
I want to talk more about that, but I just want to point out this crazy synth jam here at the end of Traffic. Cool. That is really cool. This is, again, that backloaded quality I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah.
The song kind of has one groove the whole time and then goes into slight crazy town just for the last 30 seconds or so here. And I think it's really cool.
It's so cool.
Yeah, you know what, Zach? I don't know if it's like me getting soft in my old age, or it's just my unadulterated love of Thom Yorke and Radiohead. You know, if it's a sycophantic kind of admiration that I have for this man, but it being his romantic partner in real life did make this whole thing hit on another level for me. And I think maybe also because, you know, we just are coming off of discussing a moon-shaped pool, and that is in many ways about the end of a relationship. And there's just something about kind of like the rebirth quality of him. It just felt really intimate to me that this is a romance acted out through dance with him and his actual partner. And I'm just like, man, like Thom Yorke has come a long way in terms of like self-confidence. I mean, like, to be the guy who was kind of like
talking about his girlfriend, waiting for something to happen, to now showing us that he has a girlfriend.
Right? He's taken a script writing class and he's learned about show, don't tell.
The most literal sense of the.
That's so funny, dude. I love that you said that, because I when I was watching this, that was my internal monologue. As soon as he like is like kind of eye fucking his girlfriend from across this train, I'm just like, oh, no longer simply claiming to have a girlfriend that we've never seen hide nor hair of. Now he's like, look at my girlfriend, the Italian model,
who looks kind of like a young Monica Bellucci, an understated Monica Bellucci, aka the hottest woman ever on earth.
I could see that. Yeah, and I just did want to also validate what you're saying, that it's like external beauty aside, I do think that like just kind of in terms of visual aesthetics, she fits the world of this video really well. And yeah, dude, it's just like you're so right. Going from talking about his girlfriend, waiting for something to happen, to having the self-assuredness to do a 15-minute interpretive dance. It's just like, we have come a long way, baby. I mean, gone are the days of being afraid to even shimmy around on stage. Like, if he was not committed to this, it would be really embarrassing, but it totally works.
And that's what I think the value in watching it, for me. I can only speak for myself multiple times. You know, I do think that I know the album itself was critically lauded, but as we've talked about with Tomorrow's Modern Boxes, that's not necessarily an indication of, at least for just you and I, of how quote unquote good or how much an album might resonate with us. Just because I don't know of a Radiohead or Radiohead adjacent work that has received, negative reviews at this point. And that speaks to either how, talented the members of the band are and the quality of their work, or how much critics just want to, appear to be right. It doesn't matter. That was a weird rabbit trail, but I just think that the short film accompaniment really lends itself to multiple watches, because that was on my mind the first couple times I'd seen it, was that it was like a little bit like, oh, I feel like I'm getting a little bit too much of a personal window into this process, but I don't feel that way. And I do feel like they have good on-screen chemistry. They really are only quote unquote intimate at the very end of the short film, and it's not like they're making out, listeners, or anything like that. I think that would be a little bit overindulgent and a little bit tough for me. I don't know, but I just think to the point you were making about how far Thom has come, we've talked a lot about how, not to objectify anybody, but, the various looks of Thom Yorke, who is a unique and different looking kind of guy. And in this video, he has a man bun. Okay, that's stylish, but, he's not afraid to let his beard gray. From what I can tell, his hair doesn't, if it's dyed, it's only partially dyed, on the very top where it still has retained some of its darker color. He's essentially letting himself go gray. And the other thing that spoke to me was the outfits that he's wearing throughout it are not like super form-fitting like rock star shit. They're like these big, like kind of canvasy raincoats, which I also think is cool because it's playing to the aesthetic and the style of the film itself rather than, Thom Yorke can look cool. When we saw him in concert, he was wearing a leather jacket. He pulls it off nicely. He's not, I forget the lead singer of Motley Crue, but he's not, trying to fit into some mold that is, that he has passed by necessarily. And I'm not trying to say every single fashion or style choice he makes is perfect and I want to embody, but I think in the context of this video and because of how personal and intimate it is, I really like the choices he makes that sort of normalize his own looks, which are not an easy thing to quote unquote normalize. I don't know.
I agree. He's owning his shit, and it's awesome and appealing. And yeah, I mean, I think the costume,
there's like big bags under his eyes, even,
Totally. Yeah, totally. I mean, he looks, like I said, like I again, I don't mean to state for the 10th time in 5 minutes how attractive this woman is, but he cuts a very unique visual figure next to somebody who's like
conventionally attractive.
Thank you. Conventionally attractive.
Yeah.
And yeah, I love the costuming in this video too, because to me, in my mind, what he and everybody else is wearing, I was like, oh, this is like government issued work uniforms.
Yeah, big time.
I'm going to play the next song called Last I Heard He Was Circling the Drain. And just to kind of throw out there the little experiment that I mentioned before that I did, kind of imagining this album as the monologue of one singular narrator throughout. That first song, Traffic, combines kind of images of wealth and opulence with images of a totalitarian society. So there's this kind of like harsh contrast there where he's saying things like, I can't breathe, there's no water, followed by a drip feed, foie gras, a brick wall, but you're free.
My favorite part.
Really good. And then the chorus is, show me the money, party with a rich zombie, suck it through a straw, party with a rich zombie. To me, this is kind of describing the beginning of this narrator's journey of going to work, going about their business, but it's in the service of this idea that they can aspire to something better.
Wow, man, good read on it. I like that.
That's just a guess. It's the image it makes me evoke. This one to me is just the depressing suffocation of the rat race. This is all really down sounding, and then the lyrics are just, swimming through the gutters, swallowed up by the city, humans the size of rats. It's all very kind of negative imagery. Yeah. What do you think about these first two songs?
Well, I mean, I don't have anything to add on the first one. I know that I like the lyrics. I like that he invokes, foie gras. Is that foie gras? Is that raw
force-fed
steak?
Geese?
Oh,
no,
okay,
it's those force-fed geese that it makes their livers balloon up to an unnatural size, and
but it's a very
delicious.
It's an expensive dish, right?
It's a very expensive dish produced in a very barbaric way.
Yeah, like veal or something, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I like that Thom at this point isn't afraid to, we've talked about that, Thom and I would say the whole band seem to hold these very progressive kind of liberal ideas, but you can't escape the fact, by the way, it's not a crime to be wealthy and successful, but, I think for I can only speak for myself, sometimes it's not that I find people that have experienced immense success and continue to use that platform as a platform to call attention to the income inequality of the world. I don't mind that at all. I think that in a way, there's a certain responsibility of somebody that has received immense success to speak their mind, whether I agree with those principles or not. I want to say that too. All that being said, I like that Thom isn't afraid to call attention to the idea that he may have been exposed to these really like upper tier echelon ideals, but he's still sort of like speaking about them in like this disgusted way, because it would be annoying, I feel like, if Thom Yorke's lyrics were so direct as like, woke up this morning, went to my 9 to 5, trying to like really relate to like the common man. I like that there's this sort of disconnect, but like this disconcert with what he's been exposed to,
Oh, that's so well said, dude.
Oh, thank you. I really like that, because it's like, I don't want this like this feeling of pretending, and it's like, I know that Thom Yorke can get into all the places, knows all the people, and that's fine. That's part of a byproduct of success, but with this one, we are more into that mode where I can hear the writer's block maybe a little bit. And that's not to say that the repetitive nature of I woke up with a feeling I just could not take is devoid of any emotion or anything like that. But, when we're talking about the conception and the recording and the lyrical approach to this album, it's so easy to gloss over the sentence of Thom Yorke wrote Anima following a period of depression, anxiety, sadness, and writer's block. It's like, yeah, okay, what else is new? That's the story behind Kid A. That's the story behind a lot of their albums. But it's like, when you really digest that and then you try and hear that in the music, it's there. And it just goes to show you that, like, I think for those of us that aspire to write, whether it's music, stories, fucking screenplay, whatever, and Jeff Tweedy talks about this in that book that I lent you that I know we both enjoyed a lot, that writer's block is a turn of phrase or description that is apt, but it's kind of what you do with that. And he doesn't come at it of like, oh, don't be weak. I love the way he approaches really difficult subject matter like that in that book. He's like, use it, is basically what he says. If you're experiencing a block, incorporate that. And I kept thinking of Thom, unsurprisingly, when I was reading that book because, it is easy to kind of gloss over. Yeah, anxiety, depression, sure. Okay, what else is new? But no, like really ruminate on that and see what he may have taken out of that. I don't know. That's kind of what occurred to me.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I loved what he said about writer's block too, where it was like kind of the idea that writer's block is a term that you've made up to describe not writing. What it actually might be is you just might not write anything good. And he's like, okay, like I have writer's block. I'm gonna like look around at things in my room and write like a free verse poem about it. And then he puts that on the page and he's like, okay, so that's not good. That's not a song, but I wrote, so I guess I don't have writer's block anymore. You know? And it's dude. Interesting that you call that out about this song, or not call out. I know you're not.
Yeah,
it's not a call out, but yeah, this one is maybe a little more lyrically and musically, and a little more of that kind of like vaguely Thom Yorke category.
It's a little everything in its right place for me. A little bit
interesting. Oh, you
woke
mean
up
just
sucking
like
on a lemon?
Sure.
Just short stanzas and repeating them, but giving you a different feeling. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but like
not at all.
Just that I woke up with a feeling I just could not take. It's pretty direct, and but how many times when you're going through a period of anxiety, or maybe you have an awful night and you just want to get some sleep, and then that brief moment when you wake up, everything's clear for a second, and then all the shit comes rushing back to you. The argument you had the night before. Whatever the dilemma you're experiencing is. And that's kind of what it reminded me of is, going to sleep at midnight, 2 a.m, or whatever, after sorting through an issue, either with another person or in your own personal life, going to sleep. And then you wake up and you're clear for that brief moment. Everything rushes back to you. Kind of like when Marty wakes up, I just had the most terrible dream. Oh, well, you're back home in 1955 or wherever the fuck, that's what it reminds me of a little bit. And I love it. I love that he's able to evoke such specific imagery, whether in my own life or from something else I've seen, in just repeating the same stanza, in this case, 4 times? It's really cool.
Yes. And that's a song for me that is one that has taken me a while to come around to fully loving, but I really, really love now. But again, I say we're 2 tracks in. I feel very, very positively about both of these first 2 tracks. Yet in my mind, the album is still kind of not really kicked in to its full power. So let's keep it moving. And the next song is a very electronic and kind of dancey groove that it starts out with. This one is called Twist.
Shake it up, baby, now. Ferris Bueller is in the music video.
Now, this is very clubby for Thom Yorke to have a song called Twist that, the main beat of is a sample of him saying the word twist. Talk about direct. This is more direct than I think he would kind of dare to be in a lot of his work up to this point. How do you feel about that? Does this one work for you?
Oh, it totally works for me. I think of it as a little bit. Let's see. This is the 7 minute and 3 second track, correct?
Yes. Well, let me check.
So this one is a little bit on the long side, but I think that as an interlude, it does a nice job. After the way you described the first 2 are totally on the money for me. They're darker in tone. I'm engaged musically. I'm engaged in the lyrics. Maybe not my very, very first listen, but I felt that way for quite some time. This song is not in the short film, correct? The short film I know hops around.
The short film goes Not the News, Traffic, and then Dawn Chorus.
Yeah, so
we have not heard Not the News. We have not heard any of those yet except Traffic. So it reshuffles the order of those 3.
Yeah, and I've been listening to this one on vinyl. I'll show you right here. I mean, it's just the album itself. It's really cool, and I really like I'm not trying to say like vinyl's a privilege or anything like that. I mean, a basic record player and setup is not that expensive, but I think listening to Thom Yorke solo music on vinyl maybe is a little bit of a privilege in that it is something to do if you have quite a bit of time.
Yeah.
And I just know that
you got to have at least 47 minutes, 44 seconds to get through this one.
Yeah, and you got to have a tolerant housemate, and I'm not saying that they have to be tolerant because it's bad, but it's a very specific thing. And I think that this song was really cool for that, whether it's on headphones or listening to it on vinyl. Oh, see, I love this part so much. It's really, really cool because it serves as, I don't know if interlude is necessarily the correct wording, but I think that's kind of how I would describe it. And there's just a lot of cool noises. And I like the way the percussion, digital or not, is mixed on this album so much more than I would say on Tomorrow's Modern Boxes because it's not oppressive. It's kind of my general thoughts.
Oh, I agree. I think the production, I think that the Nigel of it all on this album is really, really stellar. I think the choices of when things change and are cut, I'm sure that's collaborative between him and Tom, all really, really work. And this song where you just paused and went, I really like this part. Again, that's what I'm talking about. I liked what came before it, but I like it so much more when it makes this switch into something a little weirder. Mm-hmm. It just made me this is one where the songs are repetitive without ever feeling repetitive to me. There's always just kind of enough careful decision making around the vocal melodies and the noises that they're adding and subtracting that I don't get bored, even though they do kind of all stay steady for the most part.
Yeah, I loved what you said too earlier, like when we were just kind of just breaking into talking about our feelings on the album, how you said that it might be intentionally backloaded, and even within the songs themselves. Oh, this part is so cool. And even and with that, in that way, what it reminds me of is The King of Limbs. And I mean, it's Radiohead. The songs are all authored by Thom Yorke, in their lyrical approach. I understand that Radiohead is collaborative and this is a solo venture, but I think it's really cool. I brought up the Suspiria soundtrack and the film specifically, and how I felt like they were kind of intertwined stylistically. And there's something about the musicality on this song and a couple others where I'm like, oh yeah, that, may sound like Tomorrow's Modern Boxes. Parts of it may sound like The Eraser. Well, of course, they're both produced by Nigel Godrich, and Thom Yorke wrote the music essentially. But in a way, though, I think this has a little bit more of a horror vibe, especially this song. That, Suspiria is not the greatest movie, in my opinion. I really enjoyed elements of it. But I think it's really cool to follow an artist's career and dive to this level of depth. Whether I'm right or whether it's just me meshing those things or not doesn't really matter to me. It's really cool to see how from one year to the next, what the work they previously did may sort of be influencing and interweaving into their new work. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, I like that you said that this one sounds kind of horror-y. I agree. Talking of these songs not losing their dynamic qualities, even though they can be somewhat repetitive. This one to me, and I don't know for a fact, but this to me sounds like two different songs that they decided to stick together.
Yeah.
And to doing that is sometimes a choice that really pays off, and sometimes it sounds a little labored. In this case, I think it really, really works. And again, I think it works so well because this song's 7 minutes long. The backbeat never changes. We're never changing tempo. But I don't ever get bored of either thing. It kind of again, in that kind of Kubrickian, I'm watching The Shining. How long have I been watching this guy just wander around this hotel before some shit starts going down way? This one changes to something very ominous right when I'm kind of yeah, I don't know if I need to hear that vocal sample of him saying twist anymore. And it goes into this whole other deeply melancholy and kind of scary section. And again, rewards you for kind of hanging on through that first 4 minutes.
Yeah, and in that way, Walker, what this song reminds me of in its structure there's a lot of great Radiohead songs that are two parts. My favorite being There There. There There is distinctly a two-part song. But if you break that down, there's really 8 parts to it, or maybe not 8, but like you have a verse, chorus, then you have the coda that repeats twice. So I guess that'd be a 6-part song. But in essence, you could divide it into 2 sections. And the way this song kind of hits me is more in the Dex Dark way, in that it kind of stays at this low hum. Dex Dark from A Moon-Shaped Pool, the 3rd track. It kind of stays in this low hum. And I love that whole first part. In any your life, but then it goes into this other da, da, da. It's not as bombastic of a coda as There, but we're kind of just like staying where you're like, ooh, we twisted, and you evoked like The Shining or Kubrickian, the way he does that. It's kind of the way like I think about The Shining is The Shining has so much like powerful imagery, but you can kind of get lost in this lull of where I'm creeped out, but I'm not. But then that bathroom scene where, I don't want to labor over this point too much, but where the N-word is spoken, and it's not. I don't want to go too far down that, but that scene is so powerful because you have Grady talking about the murder of his own family, putting it on Front Street. You have the use of one of the most offensive racial slurs in existence, and it's done with a lot of intentionality, and it just snaps you right back into what you're supposed to be watching and paying attention to.
Somehow, all the ugliness that is bubbling under the surface of this place is right in your face.
Yeah, and I don't actually mind, comparing it to The Shining, because it's like, I was just talking about how like I think Tom's work composing a soundtrack for a horror film like influenced it. And I just feel like this song does a really nice job of lulling you into this like false sense of security and then popping. And it does end on a little bit of a brighter thing. And I think Dex Dark does that in such a great way, and I think this song does too.
Yes. And even though I do think that scene in The Shining is very powerful and well executed, I'm glad that Tom doesn't use a racial slur to achieve the same effect in this.
No, certainly not. Certainly not. You wanker.
You stupid git. You prat. You bellend. Shall we listen to the next song? This is, as I said before, my favorite song on the album, and hot take, I think maybe the crowning achievement of Tom's solo work so far.
Ooh,
Dawn Chorus.
It's a baked potato hot take. I love it. You got to put that shit on Reddit before somebody else does.
Hot take, Dawn Chorus is a great song. It's funny to say hot take and then just say something like positive. Because hot take usually means I'm about to take this thing everybody adulates down a notch.
Oh, I mean, in terms of Radiohead Reddit, though, I think hot take usually means I'm about to give a positive opinion. That's something that is not generally seen as the best is the best.
Sure. Yeah, that's true.
I was really disappointed in the success or lack thereof of my hot take post on Radiohead Reddit.
Hey man, we're throwing a lot of shit at the wall on Radiohead Reddit, and as well covered on this podcast. It hasn't all been appreciated in its time.
Now this song, I really, if we're talking about kind of feelings, and I want to let you speak to it because you said it's your favorite, but just kind of what I'll say right off the top. I don't know, man. It's hard. I mean, it's like in terms of like feelings it evokes, where it's like a feeling of optimism, but albeit shrouded in a lot of melancholy and darkness, I would say. It really kind of reminds me of like the way Eyes Wide Shut makes me feel, especially juxtaposed to something like Full Metal Jacket and The Shining, where I'm like, man, there is sort of just like a more human quality to it. It's more sort of just like going through the motions in a way that I can relate. I'm married, I'm I'm living my life. I'm not a doctor. I'm not in Manhattan. I'm not wealthy, but I can relate to these things, but it's still shrouded in a lot of thought and darkness. But not in the same way that those other films maybe are. I don't want to keep going one-to-one comparisons. That's probably the last time I'll try and do it, but that's maybe the only way I can describe it personally. But I really dig this song. I love that it's so high for you. I'd love to hear you speak on it.
I mean, I get a very similar set of images from it that you're speaking to. This is like, in my mind, another anthem of suburban ennui. similarly to No Surprises way back on OK Computer, kind of evoking these images of familial security or financial success, but imbuing them with all this sadness, but where No Surprises sounds more overtly negative or depressed. This one does have a certain underlying optimism, but it's kind of a resigned optimism. But, this song for me is really the centerpiece of the album, both literally and narratively, thematically. It's where the anxiety that is kind of nonstop on this record reaches a peak and gives way to something more calm. I kind of picture the narrator of this song walking out of their door in the early morning. They're greeted by the dawn chorus of birds, and they find themselves questioning all the choices they've made and that have been made for them to lead them to this place. And they don't necessarily like what they find themselves stuck in. But I also feel that as they've walked out the door, they've left someone or someones inside that they love, and they've decided to do this every day, and they've decided to go out and face it all again as a trade-in for this love and security, but they're not sure that it's worth it or that they want it anymore.
Yeah.
And it kind of leaves open this question of like, is the narrator going to disappear and leave all this behind and like free themselves from this hamster wheel of like capitalist society? Or will they kind of face another day of indignity and bullshit with the hope of returning to something warm and that human connection?
Man, that's so powerful.
I mean, this song really gets me because I'm not sure that they want to be free of it if they really could, or if they even know who they are outside of the constructs that they've built this life on. And I think that that's really, really put front and center with the fact that Tom's voice is half human, half robot.
Totally.
It's like the narrator's inner humanity is fighting to be heard among this din of like work, bills, traffic, and electronics.
Yeah.
And at the end, we even get these birds that it's the sound of this chorus of birds, but they're electronically manipulated. And this song makes me very emotional, and it made me cry when it was used in the short film. But that's
it's
what
used
it says
in the twilight of the short film, correct?
Yeah, it's how it ends, and it's like when they find each other,
Yeah.
And they're doing this dance on the bus, and it feels like it's this like acknowledgement of love.
Yeah, and it's so beautiful too because they just sort of like interlink and like their foreheads touch. It's a very intimate, romantic thing, but as I said before, it's not that they're furiously making out or whatever. And I don't know because they didn't put that on film. I don't know how that would resonate. I tend to think it would be a little bit kind of like, but I love just what you were honing in on as far as like whether, I really love how much you're able to derive from what he's writing. And in that way, a lot of what you said about this is me re-summarizing. I'm not saying this is what you said exactly, but like the implementation and familiarity with technology and capitalist society, the acceptance of that, but simultaneously like resenting it, really reminds me of a lot of the themes that are present on Amnesiac. Not necessarily on Kid A. That's where I think Amnesiac really juxtaposed itself from Kid A. Kid A is sort of this like grandiose resentment of climate change and the lack of the Western world addressing that properly. To Tom, I tend to agree with a lot of his observations, but Amnesiac is sort of shrinking that down, starting with Packed Like Sardines in a Crushed in Box. And I got a lot of this from our discussion. I'm not saying that like this is the correct read on the album, but I'm a reasonable man, get off my case. You talked about how that's sort of like being on the subway going to work, or just functioning in the bullshit minutia that is society in the modern world. And I think it's easy to get into a place, I can only speak for myself mentally, of being like, fuck this, fuck that, but then also you have to step back and be like, hang on, I may be coming at this from a place of privilege, but like by and large, I have access to, if I break my leg, I'm not going to die from that, I can go to the emergency room. Whether that ruins me financially or not, that's a different story. But I can live in a world where a minor accident, I can sit at a computer, I can have this conversation with you, And I think that's what Amnesiac is really talking about in like pull revolving doors. where it's like these lyrics that seem to be emanated by a robot, and I don't know. I feel like I've sort of strayed away from what you were saying. I don't mean to say that this is what you were saying, but it reminds me a lot of that tonally.
No, I don't think that you've gotten away from it at all. I mean, I think that you kind of keep keying in on the laying out of contradictions that are on this album. And I think that that's a really, really nice facet to what's going on here. Cause again, when I see this person in Dawn Chorus, it's a moment that the album kind of stops to like wonder, like, what does all this mean? Right. And do I want any of this? But I don't see it as somebody who's like, oh, I wish I could leave my family. I see it more as exploring the idea of like, you have this human instinct to want a family, but you end up with a mortgage and a minivan, and it's kind of like, and it's kind of like the simultaneous resentment and appreciation of that whole idea. It's like, did I want all this shit, or do I want the idea that it represents? And what's the idea that it represents? And to me, this album, especially because of the short film, the big idea that it keeps getting at is like the love that we're looking for underneath all of this. And I guess I mean love as a stand-in for just humanity or human connection, like not necessarily romantic love, but just, of like, and kind of, like I said, I picture the person going to work kind of going, I could just run into the woods and go be an animal. But I guess I'll do this one more day for the idea that, I'm going to come back to something nice. And so,
after years of waiting, nothing's changed.
Exactly. I was looking in the wrong place. I mean, it's all there. It's all a million ways of saying kind of the same three things with Thom Yorke, but they are three things that I will be happy to listen to him say until the end of time.
No, absolutely, dude. I mean, he's definitely honing in on the same things. And I mean, even as we don't have to belabor this point, but I got so much out of what you and Noel, but really you, honestly, I mean, honed in on as far as your read on the song Present Tense, which is maybe a little bit more near term in terms of the writing, just about kind of like fighting in your body, fighting within yourself, and yeah, like I say, I mean, things don't have to align. It's not like I can be in the mind of Thom Yorke and know like, oh, he was specifically talking. A lot of this comes from the soul, But I think with somebody like Thom who doesn't write these, Bob Dylan-like songs that are, anthemic or whatever.
Stories.
Yeah, it is really cool to sort of like see just the recurrent themes. Yeah. Anyways, I don't know. And listeners, go back and listen to our episode with Noel Brown to hear kind of what Walker got out of a lot of the lyrics written in present tense. But yeah, I was really calling back to Amnesiac on this song and all the way up to the Radiohead album and that song specifically. So I don't know.
I love it. I love that you're, connecting kind of the present day with the past that we've come from with Thom Yorke and Radiohead. And if that song is about stopping to wonder what it all means, contemplate perhaps breaking free of the cycles that you find yourself stuck in, the next track, in my mind, I Am a Very Rude Person, is about getting your nose back to that grindstone.
Yeah.
And going back to work. The refrain that's repeated a lot in this song is, you don't mean a thing, but it won't bother me. That to me is very much in the vein of those I'm a reasonable man, get off my case type of lyrics that Thom loves to kind of snottily spit back at you. And I think turning something insipid like that into a song lyric kind of underlines the meaninglessness of these things that we say to each other all the time.
Yeah, you got to get your head in the game, I mean, whatever, maybe you and I know specifically.
Working hard or hardly working.
Exactly, yeah, and it's like sometimes, I've mentioned that I work for a corporation, and I've had a really positive experience with the bosses I've had, and I say that I don't think anyone I work with is listening to this, but I do feel very, very fortunate in that way, you know, and maybe that has to do with, you know, my place in life. Regardless, sometimes not being somebody who says like get your head in the game or whatever, but sometimes those type of phrases can resonate differently depending on the mood I'm in. Sometimes it could be like, fuck you, you know, if that's the encouragement I'm given. But most of the time I know what's behind that, you know, and I don't unpack it that way. And I'm like, yeah, okay, you know, business jargon is what I'm trying to say, you know? Yes. But I love the way Thom can call attention to the silliness of that by just saying it, you know? It's something he's always been able to do, and I just love it.
Yes. I mean, it reminds me of like Office Space, you know? Would you ever say to somebody, it looks like you have the case of the Mondays? It's like, hell no, man. Somebody said that to me, I'd probably kick their ass.
Like, yeah. I'm gonna need you to come in today. Yeah, it's not a half day. I love it when he's leaving him the voicemail or the message on his answering machine when he's not coming on a Saturday. And he's like, yeah, it's not a half day.
Also, just that movie, I was gonna say it's underrated. It's such a cult favorite. I think it's pretty
appreciated. Yeah.
But I mean, I guess it just was a bomb at the time, kind of both critically and but yeah, the steady addition of noises that like drive him insane. It is that just a moment. And it's like, dude, the struggle is real, man. I was taking tickets at a comedy show the other night, a place I'm happy to be, a show that I'm excited to be doing, having great interactions with people as they're coming in. Everyone's excited to see the show, all this stuff. But after like 4 people, I found myself switching into this rhythm where I said the same 2 sentences in the exact same rhythm. It's just like, it is scary kind of how quickly we become robots.
Well, I think that's okay
when
though,
we're
because,
doing menial tasks.
No, I struggle with that too. And I think what's okay is like, and again, like I'll take this back to having like a more corporate-y type job, having that kind of job where I don't mean to make it sound like I'm answering the phone, but it is incumbent upon me to embody that type of behavior to a degree. And I think what's really important, we can't escape that. And this kind of ties into, I think, what Thom is speaking to. We can't escape the necessity of doing that in modern society, whether you work for a corporation or you, whatever, like that is incumbent upon us to a degree. But I think resetting yourself and checking yourself of like, have I fallen into this rhythm of robotics is really, really crucial, because you can't wholly avoid that. Whether it's customer service, whether it's writing an email, whether it's taking tickets, whatever, you know, and it's okay to be sickened by that every now and then. But I think just having that conversation with oneself can really go a long way. You know, hey, I found this rhythm and that's okay. And people like it, but I need to reset and not just make sure that I'm purely being robotic. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. The humanity fighting through the automized robot behavior. Again, it all ties back to the dream, that the technology dream that Thom has put us in on Anima. This next track, in my opinion, is a fucking banger, and it is called Not the News. Those opening notes to me almost sound like a TV news jingle.
Oh,
and
big
then
time.
It immediately gives way to something quite
it reminds me of a TV news jingle, but with like one of the layers cut out.
Oh,
so it's like that doesn't like, you know, I can almost picture the logo of a certain network, we'll just say, that uses the colors blue and red a lot. And that by invoking those colors, I'm talking about all of them. But you know, like it's like they have this like very like da 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 da, but like if you took out one of those layers, that's kind of what it reminds me of. But removing one of those layers makes it a lot more creepy, which I like.
Yeah, and it starts with and now it's that dun 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 dun.
Yeah, and it's so evocative of like kind of, you know, I want to be careful when I invoke Orwell because, as you've really astutely pointed out, like people on all sides of the political aisle will invoke Orwell, and I'm not coming at it from the side of a political aisle. But it does, one thing that he speaks so strongly to, and I'm thinking specifically in 1984, is 2 minutes hate. The responsibility that is mandated or not to participate in this live stream all the time. It can really just be creepy when you think about it, for a minute. And there's so many authors and movies and stuff that commentate on this so much more eloquently than I am right now. But I think that, and this is just a feeling, but I think that dejection with modern media is certainly something that Thom has spoken to directly, not in his music. And I feel like this song really evokes, obviously the name is going to tilt me that way, but intentional or not, it really just makes me feel that sort of like, makes my skin crawl about like, and I'm not somebody that has the news on all day. I try not to doom scroll. We certainly don't have it on in our TV in our house, but you can't escape it,
Yeah, of course. And the news is such a generic term now too, or what is, to quote the name of the song, not the news, right?
Yeah.
Everything is and isn't news. And he said in that quote that we read, God, it's so hard to not immediately slip into cliche when you make a critique of us all living on our phones.
Yeah.
But it is a fact of modern life that everyone is contending with in one way or another. And that constant flow of information that can be impossible to verify and is so curated to your pre-contained biases is not the news.
Yes. Wow. Well said, man. Very well said.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that this song, like a lot of the album, it's just calling out the contradictions that this person is living in. Like, who are these people? I'm in black treacle. Treacle being like a sweet dessert. The image of black treacle is so cool. And I'm guessing there's probably an allusion to the black screen that we're all staring into all the time there.
Sure.
But man, when those strings kick in, it just really hits for me. This one is like,
I love this song.
This one like gets me like pumped up and again, it's about 3 minutes into the song when really anything other
You're
than
talking about the strings we just heard?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
And
part
up to
so
that
much.
point, it's kind of all blips and bloops. And it's blips and bloops that I really like. But again, it's like backloaded. It's like, you're kind of like, oh yeah, I'm in a Thom Yorke electronica song. And then this huge, scary, massive, foreboding string section gives the melody that he's singing so much oomph that I would not have even known was there until those dark chords are kind of underscoring it.
Yeah, and this is where I feel like Nigel is really, really bringing his best as a producer, and Thom too. I know it's a collaborative process. I think I've jokingly said cringe when I picture Thom and Nigel DJing. I hope nobody that finds that as an art form really inspiring and awesome was offended by that, because I do know that it is an art form. I like to watch Shaquille O'Neal DJ. I like to. I've honestly just not spent time watching, video footage of Thom and Nigel DJing, but I really do think that you hear that level of experience and aptitude, like kind of on display in that song, where it is sort of just this electronic, like repetitive focused song. But as you said, when the strings come in, it really brings a lot of oomph to it, to the point where it reminds me of like Kashmir by Led Zeppelin or something like that, albeit maybe a little bit more tasteful. But yeah, it's just a really, really cool song. And this is the value, I think, of like, listening to this kind of music, dissecting the lyrics, understanding that your appraisal, your take on it might be just within you, not saying that this is exactly what the songwriter was intending, and listening to it and kicking around with other people, because I'm not saying that you'll have the reaction that you'll like it more, and that's what you need to do. Some stuff is good and some stuff is bad, but I don't know. I really liked your take on it, and it really is just enhancing the value of this album to me.
This next song is called The Axe. Now, if I Am a Very Rude Person was the kind of like keeping my head down, working at the office, working hard or hardly working phase of the album. This is the Stephen Root, where's my stapler? I'm going to burn the building down moment.
Yeah. Yep.
This one's very angry.
Yeah.
Another great moment when after he tells him he's moving his office again, the tag of the scene. Oh, there's my staple. Yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and take that.
Oh, I know. It's so
the final indignity.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is really angry lyrics. Starts out, goddamn machinery. Mm-hmm. Why don't you speak to me? One day I'm going to take an axe to you. The pitter patter, what does it matter? And where's that love you promised me? And then the chorus, I thought we had a deal. And again, I just think I just really am in love with your comparison to Packed Like Sardines.
Sure.
Because, again, that I thought we had a deal, to me, Packed Like Sardines in a crushed tin box, and the refrain of, I'm a reasonable man, get off my case. It means the same thing here as I thought we had a deal, which is, hey, I played your game. I went to the right school. I got the right job. I got the white picket fence, the perfect family. Where is that love? I thought we had a deal.
You know what it reminds me of a lot? I would say in title, yes, absolutely. We've talked about, I think, Pink Floyd, the group, in a positive light. And then we've talked a lot about some of our distaste for Roger Waters. Not entirely, but he could be a little bit overindulgent, and certainly some of the comments he's made about, some of the global world conflict disagrees with us, I would say. I'm confident speaking for both of us in that respect. But in a way, would you say that's accurate, by the way, as a summary?
Yeah. I think he cares about issues that I actually care about quite a bit, but I think he's has a very imprecise touch and is at best insensitive in how he characterizes things, and sometimes I get a sense of more overt prejudice in how he characterizes things.
Thank you. In that way, but that aside, I would say tonally what some of this album is really reminding me of is a whole era of Pink Floyd, from metal. One of these days I'm going to chop you. What is it? One of these days I'm going to chop you up into little pieces. There's something about some of the tone of this album that made me think of that, and then made me think of certain aspects of Dark Side of the Moon all the way up through The Wall. And I think that I just wanted to call attention to the fact that I think Walker and I both probably love different aspects of Pink Floyd's golden era. But also I think that when we're talking about influences on Thom Yorke and Radiohead, I brought up Peter Gabriel. I can't put that aside. I really hear a lot of Peter Gabriel kind of influencing just Thom Yorke's overall vibe. Maybe not sound necessarily, although I do think that's there too. I hear a lot of kind of sort of the lower hums of Pink Floyd. Not Money, not Time, those songs that I love, but sort of those interlude tracks on The Wall that I frankly, not all of them, but frankly love. And, I've got a little black book with my poems in it. What is the name of that song? Nobody Home. Yeah, Nobody Home. And just, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to go through track by track, but I was just, it's okay if you don't have anything to add to that, but I just wanted to call attention to, I think some of Roger Waters' greatest songwriting is in the interlude tracks. And I hear some of that on this album.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think that they're dissatisfied with a lot of the same things, and I just think Thom Yorke is just a supremely more talented songwriter.
Totally. I think though, in that way, and this is just my opinion, I think where Roger Waters might not get, I don't want to say he doesn't get enough credit, but some of the tracks on The Wall that deal with maybe thoughts of self-harm and a complete and total dejection with society and fame, I think are pretty original and new to music at that time. Not that people weren't commenting on sadness or the world around them, but just the tone. And I just think that is something that I think Radiohead specifically have refined, but I think is really, really cool on The Wall, and I hear a little bit tonally in this album. Anyways, I don't need to belabor the point.
Yeah,
I just wanted to call attention
for sure.
to that.
I think this song is so great.
I love this kind of like house music beat in the background. It's cool.
This sounds to me too, listening to it now, this groove that we're hearing, I think might be, and it could be a synth, but I feel like this could be a guitar part that has been electronically manipulated.
Oh, big time. Yeah.
It's hard to know. I mean, as with the last Thom Yorke solo album, there's not a lot of guitar to be heard on this album. Not a ton of guitar on the Eraser either, but I would say definitely
it's
more
not terribly silly. Listeners, Walker, tell them what it's from.
That is from the Ministry of Silly Walks sketch on Monty Python, which I recently showed to my 9-year-old, and he loved it. In particular? Yeah, so I just was like, okay, the only thing you need to know to enjoy this sketch is that England has a much more functioning and bureaucratic government than we do, and they've got all these different departments for different stuff, and they're making fun of the idea of what if they had a governmental department that specifically registered silly walks.
Well, I forget who our main character is, but that's my favorite part because it's John Cleese, very serious behind the desk, but when he gets up and he does his insane silly walk. That's the best part.
It's the hugest. You scream because he's so serious, but then he goes, "The problem is, good sir," and then starts doing the most insane walk you've ever seen around the office while delivering this monologue. Yeah, it's unreal. It's I think one of the biggest payoffs in any comedy sketch ever is when he gets up and starts doing that.
Absolutely.
And also, everyone's played their part so brilliantly too, because Michael Palin's thing too is like he's aspiring,
he's distraught that he can't.
Yes, he's sweaty and really eager. He's very nervous. He's very eager to show that he has this new silly like the way they play. They take such an insane concept and play it so real is amazing. Now we're almost to the end of this album. We've got 2 tracks left. This one is called Impossible Knots. Now, thematically, I would say that this covers similar ground as some of the other ones, where this one is kind of more of a nose back to the grindstone type of song. Mm-hmm. I'm heading in the wrong direction. I can't make the big connection, but in my line of business, there's no room for mess. I'll take anything you got. I'll take anything you got. I guess the thing that I would point out about this song that's interesting to me is we clearly spent some time with Flea, didn't we?
I was looking to see if he got any credits. I know Joey Waronker, I think, provided percussion on 1 or 2 tracks on this album. So we have like
I believe maybe the last one.
Yeah, like a reassemblage of some of the. But man, dude, I was thinking the same thing, and only in the most recent listens, because when I first was diving into this album back in 2019 and 2020, I had not spent any time with Atoms for Peace or any substantial time. But man, I was like, this bass line is groovy as shit, and it does sound very Flea, but I didn't see him in the credits anywhere.
No, I that's so funny, dude. I was like, oh my gosh, is this a leftover from the Atoms for Peace jam session that they built a new song around? But no, it's Thom, because they definitely would have credited him. And now we know from the Smile that Thom is super adept on the bass guitar, as he is on the guitar and piano. But this is a funky track, and there is.
It's a busier bass line though than I usually hear in the Smile, and I think that's just because it's isolated. You know, I'm still not great at hearing the bass. I would say maybe that might be something that I think you have a little bit better of a tendency to do when we're listening to music together. And I think that just comes from experience. You know, I think the bass is really something that you start to hear without isolating it. Maybe if you played it a little bit more, you could really gain an appreciation for how much goes into playing the bass guitar. But yeah, I mean, it just feels a little faster and a little busier than what I've heard on the Smile from Thom.
It's not a call-in. it's more of a Flea. And so I mean, listen to this.
So tasty.
So I like to think that Flea rubbed off on Thom a little bit on this one. But you know who is featured on this song, Zach, is the Bald King himself, Phil Selwyn.
That's right. Yeah.
So this drum loop is a sped up drum loop of Phil.
I wish he would have sang and provided vocals too, though. How awesome would that have been?
Yeah, and written all the songs on this album. I think this song rules.
Yeah, it's tough, and we don't need to do it to rank songs, but I would say this is a tug of war in the 2 spot for me as far as my second. I know what my favorite song is.
What's your favorite?
Traffic.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What about Traffic? Is it just?
I mean, I think the imagery
is just your favorite, or
no? I think the imagery of the short film is really kind of laid in my mind. Whether it's properly synced or not doesn't really matter. But I think the visual accompaniment really helps kind of the melody, air quotes around melody, sort of resonate. I really like the words. I think it's a really strong opening statement. And it's hard to pick out a favorite song on this album because unlike Tomorrow's Modern Boxes, there isn't a song that I dislike. Yeah. So, it really does sort of work as sort of one kind of journey, which is different. On the Eraser, I love the Eraser. There's not a single song I dislike, but I have my top 3 songs for sure. On Atoms for Peace and Muck, I have my top 3 songs. This one is more of a journey for me, and I think a lot of that has to do with a lot of the concepts that we've honed in on, together or independent or whatever. But it really does, and probably because of that short film accompaniment too, right? It really is more narrative for me. But yeah, I would say Traffic just stands out the most, and that might change too.
I think this is one of my favorites. I agree with you. This one is like there's only favorites, no least favorites. Mm-hmm. I think this whole thing just works so well the way it's put together. Obviously, I already stated Dawn Chorus is my favorite, but I think in the number 2 spot it would be that last one, Impossible Knots, and Not the News. Not the News, just something about that one just gets me pumped.
Maybe
that it's just like just evil sounding. Now this last song is called Runway Away, stylized all together as one word. Opens up with the most recognizable guitar sounds that we've heard on this album. Kind of a Hunting Bears type of groove a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Such a good call, Walker. I love that. I love it.
Now, Zach, I know we're pretty early in this one and it builds into something quite different, but what are your feelings about Runway Away as a closing track?
Well, you evoked Hunting Bears. What I was thinking of when I've been listening to it is the song, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the Tool album, 10,000 Days. This song has a very atmospheric Tool vibe to it, and that might be the first time I've ever, evoked Tool. But that is my favorite Tool album, listeners. It's whatever your feelings are on that band is totally fine. But I would say if you haven't dipped your toe in the Tool pool, try that album. It has very atmospheric vibes in that way, and I think that just speaks to the dynamics of them as a band. We're not talking about Tool. I love this song a lot. It's a really great one, and I love that it's on the heels of Impossible Knots, where we had a more bass guitar driven song. Now we're starting off with a guitar sort of to lead us in, right? It's really, really, really cool.
Yes, and it builds very much into not a guitar song, becomes more of a kind of collage of electronic noise with a computerized voice that you're hearing now saying, "This is when you know who your real friends are." Now, Zach, I think this ends the album on a very pessimistic note, thematically, because it kind of feels like the persistence of the human spirit that has been fighting through this kind of dystopia has been defeated, and it's given way to the machines that are oppressing us. And I mean machines, both in the literal sense and in the broader sense of systems of oppression.
And in the Matrix sense, right?
yeah, very much. This computerized voice saying, this is when you know who your real friends are. It has this very authoritarian kind of feel to it. And it makes me think that in the world of Anima, that technology, war, wage slavery, famine, pollution, and endless growth have kind of run away, run amok, and won. It feels kind of like if OK Computer ended with Fitter Happier.
Yeah. You know what I love, man? I love the themes that you're able to pull out, whether it's from something you read or something that occurred to you. I just think that is really like a cool skill that you have. So I just want to compliment that. And yeah, man. And for me, I kind of was shrinking it down in my mind. And I talked about how Noel, in our episode with him on a Moonshaped Pool, how he was able to kind of pull out of daydreaming, how he said this sound sounds angry, and sort of the reverse masking of Half of My Life. And I was like, oh, wow, that's so interesting. I thought of that. That kind of guided my listening to this, in this track specifically, in the lyrical content. It sort of feels like the inverse of This Is What You Get When You Mess With Us in Karma Police. And it feels like stripping that down to inverting it and sort of like, I'm alone. And to hone it on the anger, I drew a totally different meaning out of it than what you were just talking about, the societal anger. And I was like, I wonder if this is Thom expressing or emoting anger at his bandmates. And I'm not trying to create some theme that there's discord within Radiohead, but I really, when I look back at my listening into this album, I remember just constantly Google searching in early 2020, will Radiohead put out another album? Were they going to tour? Not knowing about The Smile. And it just kind of, it doesn't like crack me up like, oh, I was so naive. I mean, I was still obsessing over what my favorite band, but I don't think I had a read on like what it's like to be in a group at that point. Not to say that I understand that now or understand the dynamics within Radiohead, but I think that I'm like, I just wonder if the part of what he's emoting on this album has a lot to do with everything we've covered. And I wonder if there might be more space that's needed in Radiohead than we're aware of. And I don't know. I don't want to create this whole fictional narrative on something that I have literally no information to support, but that was just something I thought of when I was listening to it. And again, it kind of in the unified, whether it's meant this way or not, in Karma Police of This Is What You Get When You Mess With Us as a unified entity, whether it's the band, society, whatever. And this one, I'm like, oh, this feels very I'm on an island. And I don't know. I mean, there's still collaboration between Thom and Johnny. We make all these jokes about Ed and how he's, happy to go along. But one of the things that illuminated that Radiohead Life in a Glass House, the book by John Hazelwood, illuminated to me is Thom and Colin have the longest history. They've always been in a band together since they were 16 years old. Then Ed, then Phil, then Johnny. And when you kind of look at the paths and you kind of think about what is the dynamics in the studio like, it really isn't, I don't think, just Thom and Johnny. And I wonder, like, how strong of a personality does Colin have? He's known Thom his entire life. He's older than him. I'm not saying there has to be some like salacious story here, but that was just something that ran through my mind when I was listening to it. And if I would love to hear if you have anything to add or not on that.
I really enjoy that. That's like a really interesting fan theory. I had not thought of it in that context. You're making me wonder now if this computer voice saying this is when you know who your real friends are is Thom kind of going like, Nigel's my only friend now. Only Nigel and my new girlfriend are invited to my birthday
and
party.
Johnny too.
And Johnny can come, but you can't bring Colin. And Ed is there, but only because he's catering the event.
Well, and also to just shoot down my it's not a theory, listeners. I'm not trying to start some there was Discord, but it has been fun throughout the course of this project. One of the things you just casually illuminated to me during Hail the Thief was you said that Ed had said that was the only album that they didn't want to kill each other after they were finished. And I just hadn't come across that information. And I was like, man, and just that little bit really stuck with me. So I'm not trying to create a narrative of Discord or that this album is also meant like it's like a rap album where it's like, in the same way that like West Coast, East Coast would call attention to each other and, kind of call each other out. I'm not saying it's that, but I just feel like Thom writes from the heart and he doesn't always know what he's even saying. And I wonder if that was elements laden within his consciousness. Because I do think that there is some definitive space being taken, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, dude, there sure is. Because, we already have covered the, as of now, last Radiohead album. And then he did a solo album. And then he started a new band. So you're right. That doesn't need to be acrimonious, but space has been taken.
Yeah.
And whether that is space from a place of, total peace among all the members of the band or space of like, I need fucking space from you. We'll never know because they're classy gents and they're not gonna go, hey, by the way, we started The Smile because it turns out Phil is like a real drag and we wanted to do something, they're never going to do that. And I hope that it's not, that there's discord because as always, as I say almost once per episode, as I say almost every episode, I'm holding out hope that there will be more Radiohead, but goddamn, what an album this is, and it's very distinct from a Radiohead album, and I love that about it. I really, really love that about it. I really get the sense that we both are huge fans of Anima. Is that a feeling that you came away from your time with this record with?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've always, since its release, I've always really, really enjoyed it. I've certainly gotten more out of it discussing it with you. It doesn't sound like we're going to do it in this episode, but I do have my placement of the Thom Yorke side project, Thom Yorke solo catalog worked out. So I'm excited to sort of review that with you whenever the time is right. But just
the 4 albums?
Yeah.
Are you hit me with it.
Oh, okay. My order goes The Eraser at number 1, Atoms for Peace, Amok number 2, Anima number 3, and then Tomorrow's Modern Boxes number 4.
I think that's a really solid ranking. I would go The Eraser, Anima, Atoms for Peace, Tomorrow's Modern Boxes. And I got to tell you, it might be a little bit of recency bias, but at this point, Eraser and Anima are in contention for that number 1 spot. I think that what I think works so well about Anima is how cohesive it is as kind of one piece, but that's also maybe why I would give Eraser slight preferential treatment, is I like that I can kind of get a little bit of this and that on that album, as opposed to like the Anima, even though I do really love individual tracks, it kind of demands a all the way through listen for me. And the Eraser, I can go, you know what, I'm going to throw on Black Swan right now and go from there.
Yeah, I think you put it best on our Tomorrow's Modern Boxes episode, in that you can, when you said that on the Eraser, you can really feel the pressure of Thom saying to himself, this is my solo debut, it better be fucking good. And I just think that comes through so strongly on that album. I mean, that is up there with Ram to me, Paul McCartney's Ram, Peter Gabriel's solo, even though I like Peter Gabriel as a solo artist exclusively, I don't love Genesis, but to me, it is just like peak a solo artist, pick whoever you like, listeners, but it stands on its own. It's one of my favorite albums ever, let alone within the Radiohead catalog. And I love this album, but to me, it's no contest, The Eraser. And the only reason why I put Atoms for Peace above this is because I do think Atoms for Peace, arrangement wise, has a little bit more for me to offer when I'm trying to listen for like musical purposes. Whereas this album, the lyrical content is so much stronger. to me, because it's clearly more thought out. But yeah, that's my order. Subject to change, as all things are, but goddamn, do I love this album. Not a labor at all, not one that had snuck by me, and it's just been so fun just re-exploring it.
Totally, man. I mean, it really is great to be kind of reaching the twilight of discussing Radiohead's canon and getting these gifts from the past in Amok and in Anima, these things that I either in the case of Amok had never listened to, or in the case of this, listened to and then for some reason didn't stick with. I just think my musical attention was other places in 2019. Yeah. If I think back on it, I think I was listening to like more hip hop at the time, and I still love hip hop now, and I have the room in my heart to love Thom Yorke and Run the Jewels. But you know how it is. Yeah. Things take up your attention. Well, they had a new album in
2020 or 2021?
2018 they had a new album. And then and then in 2020. But yeah, so
I listened to that 2020 album a lot. That shit's fucking rad.
Yeah, Run the Jewels 4 is great, as are 2 and 3, and 1 is cool too, but 2 is where it really kicks in. In any case, we'll talk about that when we do a season about Run the Jewels.
Yeah.
But did you have any final thoughts about this album before we close out here?
No, not at all, man. What a joy to listen to it with you and unpack, I think, sort of the lyrical themes, the short film. Listeners, as always, please, I encourage you to listen to this album. If you haven't gotten the chance to listen to it before listening to this episode, I kind of doubt that, but hey, you never know. And that would be such a nice compliment to Walker and I if this is your first exposure to it. And that short film directed by P.T. Anderson is a really great companion piece. But those are my final thoughts, and just thanks for doing this episode. It was so much fun.
Likewise, I echo everything Zach just said, and I think that I really had ample time to kind of lay my thoughts about this album on the table. Listeners, we hope that you enjoyed going through Anima with us and discussing it. If you're new to the show, we've talked about all of Radiohead's previous 9 studio albums, as well as other side projects. So go back and give those a listen. Welcome to the show. And even though, as I said, we're reaching the end of Radiohead and their side projects, we still have more to discuss. There is still going to be a couple episodes about the Smiles. Zach and I still need to go back and rate and rank all of the Radiohead stuff we've covered. Next week, we're doing something a little bit different. And I won't say exactly what it is, but I will say fans of Idiobat will be pleased. And with that, thank you so much for listening. Remember to follow the podcast, rate and review, tell your friends. We'll be back next week on a Friday. I have been Walker Glenn.
I'm Zach Glenn.
Take care, listeners. Bye.
Bye.
Idiotalk is a Glenn Brothers production. Get in touch with us at idiotalk.podcast@gmail.com or follow us on Instagram at idiotalk.podcast. And thanks for listening to